Hello, everybody. Good to see everybody again. I think I know everybody. So, everybody, I think, knows everybody else more or less.
I don't think I want some more.
We just introduced.
You now know each other. And Sandy, do you know anyone?
Yes.
Good. Okay, well, I'm sorry. Everybody else doesn't. We've seen everybody else. Anyhow, so, this is supposed to be in politics in Europe, the US, and Israel. It says revised, but I'm revising it again. This, that's what,
That's okay.
all right. Talk about how it's going, maybe years. But anyway, why am I teaching this particular course this semester? Well, I got the idea to follow up for the rabbi's class last semester. And he sort of covered ancient, welcome, glad you might be fine. Anyhow, last semester, I covered, Jewish political traditions, sort of ancient and medieval, I guess, sort of. Maybe back to the rabbinic period. I wasn't there for the last couple of hours. So I don't know.
We got to the rabbis and then we got stalled.
It's still on the rabbi.
Stalled.
So rabbis and sages, we landed up talking about controversy of dissent, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, the good man of the town, did you talk about the bad men of the town? I don't know.
No, we didn't get to towns at all.
No, and the Gentile state. of course
No.
you didn't. But also, there were some of those, but in a different time period. I am a modern historian. That's what I mean, but really, I do modern Jewish history, and I was sort of trained as a graduate school as a Jewish political historian. Then I became a social historian, a women's historian, so I've gone around fields. But I think that this topic is particularly relevant these days because of what's going on in the world, in the Jewish world, as well as the general world. But we're not going to get there until towards the end of the course. So if you thought I was going to talk about contemporary Jewish politics, I will eventually if you stick it out for that long. As you can see from the outline that I gave you, we'll start with European, it's all European basically, in the first part of the course, and then we switch to American, then we switch to Israel and Zionism. So that's sort of the way the course is organized. I used to stick to a syllabus very religiously, but I don't anymore. But this was the original intent of what I was going to teach, and it's not that I'm going to make changes already. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about myself and my background so you'll understand where I'm coming from. Okay, most of you know me, but okay, I have a PhD in Jewish history, well, in Eastern European and Jewish history, and I've taught a whole range of Jewish studies courses over the years, but most recently I've been teaching adult ed courses, and that's what I like best. Because people come because they want to learn, because they want to be here. They don't get credit, it's whatever. So you come in because you want to be here. So I started teaching courses on Jews and politics, I don't know how many years ago, but I taught it mainly as an adult ed course because undergraduates would jump around too much. Undergraduates wouldn't relate to this very well. So, but the first time I taught this course, I taught it in Highland Park, New Jersey, as an adult ed class in the evenings, and the class was probably about a dozen people, maybe if you were 8 to 10 or 30. I don't even remember exactly. But what was striking of that course was that I knew 2 people in the course quite well. One was my mother-in-law, and the other was her brother. And you could see the range of Jewish politics right there. The mother-in-law was, well, I won't tell you too much about her background, but she was, I would call her a Hadassah lady, because that's really what she was most devoted to, although she belonged to various other women's organizations. She was active in federation. She took ed classes. She was just an amazing woman. I don't know, some of you might remember her. She was really incredible. But anyway, so she was more on the traditional side and actively involved in women's organizations, especially also. But the brother sort of followed their father, and he was a leftist, quite far to the left. And he's a very, some shade of between pink and red. So they would often in class would disagree with each other. And it was interesting because I didn't know if everybody in the class realized that they were brother and sister, because her brother certainly didn't belong to the synagogue, because he was a leftist, and he, the organization he was most devoted to was the ACLU. And he traveled all over the place. He traveled to Iran after the revolution, and first was, and anyhow, he traveled a lot and visited places, but he was less likely to visit synagogues when he traveled than my mother-in-law was that way. Okay, so that was the first time, and it was an interesting experience because, I had a range of people in the class, which I might not have now. I don't know, I don't see that you have to make yourself politically at this point, but if you'd like to share your your overall political Beltane challenge, I guess, worldview, you're welcome to do so. And you're also welcome to talk at any point during the class, because I'll call upon you and that might land up a discussion. I don't want to do all the talking. And one of the reasons I brought a big thing of water with me is that these days I have to get right out very often. So anyway, do you have any strong political feelings about anything? I mean, very strong political feelings that I should be aware of.
I wouldn't say strong. I'm fairly liberal, I guess. I am a Hadassah lady.
Yeah. I also belong to Hadassah, but that's because my mother-in-law made me a Hadassah.
I named my mother a Hadassah after that, but I'll leave it at that for now.
I think I would say central left.
To the left? Okay. And what does that mean to you?
It means I'm open to listening to both sides of the argument, but I tend to come back on the left side.
Okay. Alex,
So I refuse to be categorized.
that's fine, but how do you describe yourself?
My overriding philosophy is I refuse to belong to any group that will have me.
You're like Groucho Marx, wasn't that?
Yes, that's who I stole it from.
Yeah, right, yeah, right. What groups do you feel strongest about not belonging to?
Well, I do belong to Bethel.
You do? Well, you come to adult ed, you don't always come to shul, but you come to adult ed.
I do, yes.
And you're involved in, various programs, yeah. Any organizations that you don't belong to?
I don't belong to the ACLU.
Okay, you're not that far to the left, okay.
I mean, they used to be a group of lawyers who would, do civil rights things,
Well, yeah.
but I think they've ventured too far off the farm, so. That's one, I have many opinions, Colleen will tell you, but
Uh,
you'll discover them in the course of the course.
All right, we'll discover them, so I won't ask you to name them all right now. Look, how would you describe yourself politically, or what organizations you either belong to or not belong to?
No, I think I'm liberal,
Mhm,
and I do belong to the ACLU.
mhm.
Oh. Come on.
And,
That makes you less liberal.
I mean, in thought, I'm liberal. In action, I don't take any, I don't go on parades or
Not an activist.
protests. I'm not an active liberal, but I'm a thinking liberal.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Rabbi, you want to categorize yourself? No, you don't want to. I know.
He's rabbi.
Wow.
That's a category.
You want to commit yourself, but.
So nothing about us without us, so I will speak up for myself. I'm an idealist, a frustrated idealist, which I think is the only way to be an idealist nowadays.
I'm sure of that.
But I feel strongly that we're all in God's image, and there's enough in the world for everyone. We all should start from a place of deserving respect and earning disrespect. Respect is something you can lose, but you start out by respecting other people because they're God's image. And we have a distribution problem, and it's on us to fix it.
Okay. How about you?
Me? I would consider myself to the right of center,
Okay, and what does that mean?
close to center. I'm not a member of the NRA,
Good. I mean, somebody else might be, but.
so that's out.
Mhm.
I'm more centrist. I see both sides,
Mhm,
but I tend to lean more a little bit to the right.
mhm.
That's about it.
Okay. How about you?
I drive my friends crazy because I'm an eclectic.
Well, I think that's what, to some degree, what your predecessors, well, immediate predecessor was saying.
Yeah, I'm an eclectic. I'm a social liberal, an economic and foreign policy conservative, and a military hawk.
Ah, okay.
My solution to get the hostages back would have been very simple. The U.S. ambassador should have told the Swiss ambassador to tell the Iranian ambassador that they back by a certain time, certain place, or Tomahawk missiles will go right through your bedroom window.
Ah,
And
well,
if you want your predecessor to do it, we have more Tomahawks than you have Ayatollahs.
okay, well, that's,
That's one approach.
yeah, that's one approach, yeah, right,
You ever in the military?
Yes.
Okay.
Member of the NRA.
What?
My feeling is if it wasn't for the second and for other 9 amendments, it would be worth squat. But that's me.
Who's that?
How about you, Irene?
Just to hate characterization.
No, you don't pigeonhole yourself, you can say what you don't belong to as well as or what you do belong.
Are you gonna balance out your husband?
That would be
You're a
highly
little
likely.
bit
I would
left
say,
of
I
center.
would say I lean more
He's
liberal
borderline.
these days and maybe more than I might have been decades ago, but you know, watching what goes on in the world and partly what the rabbi said about being idealistic and how you should treat people. Idealistic with some realism thrown in, perhaps. That's just me. I listen more than I
Okay. How about you, Sam?
I don't know. I think I'm an angry liberal.
Who are you angry at?
I get upset about people who make statements that they're going to kill all the Jews all the time, always, and retweet it. Because I'm being a nurse all those years, I treated people, didn't matter what they were. But I would have trouble treating someone who made that vow. So, yeah, so it's, yeah. love groups like this because they're all turning
But like, it's really good if people come from different sides and different backgrounds, because they've got different things to contribute. I mean, it's kind of, if everybody's homogeneous, then life gets pretty boring. I mean, I don't think I identify myself politically, but I think, yes, I'm left liberal, right? And sometimes I'm more to the left side, sometimes I'm not. But that's sort of been the way I've looked at the world for as long as I can remember. And I guess one thing my father taught me very early on was that there are two sides to every story. So if you only give one side, then you're not getting the story. Now, I don't always listen to the other side. But I should do that more. But, nobody's completely right and nobody's completely wrong. I mean, some people are, if they're anti-Semites are completely wrong, of course. But it's sometimes possible to understand where they're coming from too, sometimes. Anyway, so you can tell, from the way I present politics that I'm towards the left. But I'm certainly not a radical leftist, and I certainly wouldn't call myself a socialist, although I sometimes might be social democratic, depending on who that fits in. Anyway, depends on the issue. Okay, so so I started to say that, that I come from a family who was from Canada, and I guess, and I remember, as little I remember about Canadian politics, was that the liberals were sort of on the left and the conservatives were sort of on the right, in most cases. And at least the Jews in Ottawa, as far as I could tell, most of them were liberals, otherwise. But there were some conservatives as well who were very prominent in the Jewish community. So you had, a moderate left and a moderate right, but there was we didn't even have a Reformed synagogue in Ottawa. So the Orthodox was the dominant religious group in the Jewish community, and I lived on the other side of the tracks because we grew up in conservative shul. That had its advantages, because if I said I went to shul, they'd have to believe me. None of the people in charge would have been there. So anyway, and I think to some degree these days, Jews tend towards the liberal more than towards the conservative, but there are more Jewish conservatives these days than I can call in the past. Okay. So it's usually a left-right split, and the right often included anti-Semites. Now they've got anti-Semites on the left. We've always had anti-Semites on the left too. The extreme left and the extreme right kind of meet, and neither of them seems to like Jews. But that's neither here nor there. I try not to look at politics through the eyes of, is it good for the Jews? Because, well, that's just a little bit one-sided. Okay, I don't promise to be balanced, however. Okay, so what do you think of when you think of Jews and politics? I mean, what does that mean to you? What kind of politics are Jews involved in, and what roles do they play? Or
Jews are highly involved in politics in this country for the 2% of the population. There are certainly many active politically and office holders locally, statewide, and federally.
And what can you say about these people? Anything you can generalize in any way?
I would say probably liberal, they probably are Democrat, mostly Democrats, and we're liberal.
That's true, it certainly used to be more true than it is now. But now, as I say, there are more Jews on the right than there used to be. But still, the Jews are predominantly on the left, and you can see that from any kind of election results. But that might be changing, I'm not quite sure, but at the moment, my views probably are not atypical for Jewish views on politics, at least they're liberal. And when I was originally trained, I was trained as I said, as a political historian. And the first, when I was studying Jewish history, I was trained by Ismar Shor's previous chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary. But we started talking about Jewish communities. The community was central to my understanding of what it means to be Jewish. You belong to a community. Now, these days you don't have to, of course. You can be unaffiliated, and that's, I think, the biggest threat to Bethel is not the people on our right, it's the people to our left, who are not politically left, but the people who are unaffiliated and who are just not interested. But I think that I was basically trained first, as I said, as a political historian. And of course, political history was all men's history, of course. Men were in politics, and women were not, and men ran things and women didn't used to. At least they might have run things behind the scenes, but they weren't too visible. So I'm not going to be talking a whole lot about women in this course. I have taught women's history, and I have to admit that my last book I wrote, the one that was most fun was about women, okay, and women in Jewish education. So anyway, and I do talk about women in politics here because it goes up to the mid-20th century. Otherwise, I couldn't talk about women in politics at all because women basically were not politically involved until, I'd say, until the interwar era, when they started to become involved, when they started to get more, be able to be citizens and have ostensibly more equal rights, but they were all able to be involved in activities and activities. They're still underrepresented. We're not going to get to that. All right, so what I'm going to talk about today is sort of the transition from traditional Jewish society eventually to modern society, using modern era. Where they affiliate. Of course, depends on who you are and where you are. Okay. If you are today, if you are from the Orthodox Jew, also Orthodox, around here, your politics are more likely to be on the right. Because you want to retain what you got and not have anything threatened by outside influences. So today in an election, you'll find that I would say most right-wing Orthodox, not on the right wing, but a little farther to the right, the traditionals, they don't see too much outside of their own community. But the vast majority of Jews, at least in this country, want to be part of the world around them. And that makes them more likely to be liberals than, because it used to be that conservatives are right and liberals were center left. Jews tend to be more comfortable there for reasons that will become apparent. We're talking about Germany in the 19th century. Not so much in the 20th century, but non-Jewish society had relatively little to do, organized Jewish society had relatively little to do with the outside world. It was mainly a case of people belonging to a local community, and in the Middle Ages up to the modern era, it was required that if you were a Jew, you belonged to a community, at least nominally, and often you paid tax to that community. Actually, if you could afford to do so. But one of the reasons why, at least in the modern era, Jews continued to belong to a community is because, well, people tend to be more comfortable with people who are like them, I guess, but also because it was certainly in early American, the early American history, 19th century American history, there was no welfare. If you needed help, you got it from the Jewish community if you were a Jew. And so you were, if you were in dire straits, you could go to the Jewish community. And most Jewish communities had interest-free loan societies and tried to help people stand on their feet if they weren't too well off. And that's still the case, officially at least in Jewish communities. We still have Hebrew loan societies, and I don't know how many Jews use them, but I'm sure some do. So one of the reasons to belong to a Jewish community is because you get help from that community when you need it. And that can be medically or politically or what, no. You don't get political help from the Jewish community. You get financial help from the Jewish community, you get support, and if you have if your relationship with the outside world is something that could be categorized as anti-Semitic, then you can go to the Jewish community and say, hey, this is the way I'm being treated and I don't like it. And so you've got organizations that deal with this all the time now, especially today, that you can go to the community and get help so that you can live in the society as a Jew, and even as a proud Jew, and you don't have to hide under the woodwork, but as you might in the time of pogroms. However, so that's one reason to belong to a Jewish community, is if you need help and support. Any other reasons to belong to a Jewish community if it's not mandatory?
If you're talking about in the past,
Yes,
you have no choice.
I know, I said that.
No, I mean, you have no choice because the non-Jewish world doesn't want you.
That's right, and sometimes I still think that hasn't changed that much, but, but yeah, no, you're right. You had to be a Jew because there was no place else you could be. I mean, that's who you were and how you identified yourself. You didn't identify yourself first as an American or as French, as German, as Russian. You were a Jew. And the question is whether that's the noun or the adjective these days, but are they Jewish Americans or American Jews, and there's really a difference. But it's in the traditional world, if you asked a Jew who the Jew was, he or she would say, I'm a Jew. There was nothing else they could answer way they could answer that question, which meant that they most often lived within a Jewish community, although they could live outside the community too, in peripheral areas, but still somehow a part of the mandatory in Europe. You had to belong to a Jewish community, and you belonged to the nearest Jewish community. And you might not have been there very often, but you paid your taxes and you tried to get in for the high holidays if you could. But that was probably true in the middle, in the early modern period too, into the modern period. So, you affiliated because you didn't have much choice and because those were the people you had to turn to because there was nobody where else you could turn. What are other reasons to belong to a Jewish community?
Well, humans are a social animal, and
Mhm.
I think we need to belong to some organization.
Mhm.
And if that's the only organization available, you're
That's
gonna
right.
belong to it. You need it, there's a need in human beings to belong.
Yeah, and as long as, your attitude was not, your attitude that you don't want, you wouldn't want to belong to a community that might accept you. But Jews basically can't belong to communities that don't accept them. And we used to think, a couple of months ago, we used to think that Jews in this country were very assimilated, that they were Americans, they were treated as equals, and, they were, look at, they're very prominent, they're very visible. What could be wrong with being Jewish in this country? That was until 2 months ago, not with the recent past. That's also true in the far distant past too. There was no place else you could go. And so that's a major reason for belonging, for identifying as a Jew and for belonging to a Jewish community. What other reasons can you think of?
Well, there's power.
Right.
But there's power. You have no power if you're just an individual on your own, but if you're a block, you have a little bit more power that you can influence.
Yeah, but you could belong to a different organization and have some political clout, even though you're Jewish, not just primarily. But yeah, there are certain organizations that you can join because they will accept you. And you often used to be very prominent in these organizations, but now you sort of question it. But I shouldn't be so presentist, I suppose. But one of the major reasons to belong to a Jewish community, as far as I'm aware, was so that you can be buried in a Jewish cemetery. Okay? And that's the reason to found communities to begin with, too. The first thing you need in a Jewish community is a cemetery. Because somebody inevitably is likely to die. These days, to be the older people, but usually a lot of younger people too. And you wanted to be buried in holy ground, I suppose, at least where they have to accept you to be buried. But so that I think is the bottom line for many Jews. They identify as Jews or associate with Jews. Sometimes they don't really affiliate in their lifetimes, but they want to be still want to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. Well, that's not as true as it used to be. But the problem is that if you want to be buried in a Jewish cemetery and you have a part of the Jewish community, it's possible that the community will gouge you so that to bury you, because you haven't been paying all through these years. So you need a cemetery and you need a community and you need support in case of anti-Jewish sentiments and actions. So there are lots of reasons to belong to a Jewish community, and until very recently, virtually all Jews did. The only way you could escape from a Jewish community was converting to Christianity. Okay, and there's no other way. There's really no other way out. You can be a Buddhist and a Jew, and you can be anything else, but you can't be a Christian and a Jew. And why is that the case?
Jesus.
Jews do not believe in Jesus, and Christians do. Christianity is totally centered around Jesus, and if you don't believe in Jesus, you can't really be a Christian. If you believe in Jesus, you can't really be a Jew anymore. Now, of course, if you're born a Jew, you're always a Jew. You can't get out of it that easily. And even if you convert, you might still be considered a Jew. Depends on where you are. But, someone like Benjamin Disraeli, for example, converted as a child, and he became Prime Minister of Britain. The Jewish Prime Minister of Britain never had. The funny thing was that he kind of identified as a Jew. And people saw him, at least as a former Jew. But politically, I mean, you could get ahead politically because he was a Christian, and he was a Jew at that time. His options would have been pretty bad. In the 19th century, it would not have been possible to be prime minister of England if you were still Jewish. But so you basically, once you're born a Jew and you admit to being a Jew, how can you tell somebody's a Jew these days? You can't. You can't at all. If you have a Jewish surname, it could be that you got a father who's Jewish, but you're not considered Jewish officially because your mother isn't. However, people whose father was Jewish might consider themselves to be Jews, they just won't be accepted in the Jewish community as Jews. They might have a Jewish surname, lots of people with Jewish surnames. We've had politicians last name Cohen who were Jewish. It happened. But certain names are clearly Jewish and other names are possibly Jewish. Some names are not possibly Jewish. But people used to convert to Christianity to escape from the Jewish community. Want to get out of there forever, not be castigated as a Jew. So that's the only way, really, you can stop being Jewish. Well, converting to Christianity or and going through formal ceremony that way. But otherwise, you're going to always be a Jew no matter where you are, no matter who you are. But it didn't seem to be that important a couple of years ago, and it probably still isn't important to a lot of people right now. But it seems to make a difference. I don't know. I wouldn't have said that a couple of years before, but okay, I'm being too prejudiced. Okay, so in a traditional Jewish community, every Jew in the area had to belong to the community unless they officially converted to Christianity, in which case they were Christian and would belong to Christian communities are different than Jewish, separate from Jewish communities. There used to be another way, and there still is a way in places like Germany today, and always was, that you could become without religion, a category called Konfessionslos, without a confession, and that was possible. You had to declare yourself as such, and if you did that, you didn't have to pay taxes to the Jewish community, okay? So that's true in Central Europe. I don't know how true it is anywhere else, but those are the people who, in this book, I refer to as former Jews. They're people unaffiliated with the Jewish community, but they haven't converted to Christianity either. So I have categorized women into Jewish Jews, just Jews, and former Jews. And usually somebody fits in one of those categories. So, but this is the least traditional of my books. My first book was on Jews of Yugoslavia. It was my doctoral dissertation. Nobody believed I was writing it, and then nobody believed it would get published, but it did. And in a way, I'm glad I wrote the dissertation because nobody had ever done it before, and nobody has done it since, to be quite honest. But they don't have to. I wrote the classic textbook, but I think I could write it differently today, maybe, than I did then, and other people could do so too, but it wouldn't sell very well. There aren't too many Jews left in Yugoslavia, and even when I wrote this, there weren't that many, but same thing with them now. But one of the things that I thought is interesting about Yugoslavia, in the days when it was called Yugoslavia, and it was one country, it was that there were different kinds of Jews in the 20th century, in a state that was created in the 20th century after World War I, and they had both Ashkenazi and Sephardi. They had both what the reform of Neolog, that was a term that was used in Europe, was Neolog, liberal, but or they could be Orthodox. And there were separate communities for each of these groups to some degree. And so, they could all, but they were all Jews. So that there was usually, in many communities in Europe, there was usually overarching bodies that like sort of Federation of Jewish Communities, and which just took care of everything with a leading population of them. Now, American Jews don't have a single organization, of course, they've got many organizations, some very duplicative, but they, in this country, you don't have to be, you don't belong to any kind of official Jewish group. But in Yugoslavia, over what the Federation of Jewish Communities included both Sephardi and Ashkenazi communities. Didn't include both the Orthodox. They opted out. They did the same thing in Vienna. That they were Jewish community. I mean, Orthodox. They were Orthodox in the Jewish community, but some of them opted out because they didn't want to support any institutions that belonged to non-Orthodox Jews. Nothing much changed, but that's so this was my dissertation, and it's very broad and a very seemingly narrow topic, and so that's where I started out, and then when it was being in the process of being published, I wrote a book called Jewish Politics in Vienna. So that's where I think of my official political connections. I do reflect me, it just reflected what I'm studying. And this is a book that disappeared into a deep dark hole and was never heard from again. But it's not an event, but Jews of Yugoslavia sold out. And it's still available, I think, online. Pay a lot of money to have a Xerox. But anyway, so that was specifically dealing with Jews and politics in the sense that it dealt with the Jewish community as opposed to mine as a religious community, which everybody had to belong to, and politics within that, but it also dealt with the involvement of Jews in Viennese politics in 20th century Austria. 20th century Austria is the only time you really had a country called Austria. Otherwise, you were Austria-Hungary or you were Habsburg. Anyway, so both of these books deal with 20th century, but there was somewhat different communities and focused on different things. Jewish politics, but the Jews, so Jewish politics in Vienna deals with, again, different kinds of Jews. It deals with Zionists and non-Zionists, and it deals with, and often non-Zionists are referred to as assimilationists, or I use the term in this book as integrationists. Nobody likes either of those terms, but anyway, there are Jewish communities that have a whole range of people belonging to them and still all affiliated. And that's true it was true in Vienna. I mean, that's true in Central Europe, Germany, Poland. You belong to the Jewish community unless you specifically opted out by becoming without religion. So, you're a Jew, you're a Jew. And so how do Jews who are classified as Jews, how did they organize themselves politically? Who represented Jews in the pre-modern world? How was before Jews became citizens of the states in which they lived, which is really the beginning when they can be involved in general politics. Before that, they can be involved in municipal politics, but in some cases, but they certainly, they're influenced by who gets voting rights in that society and who's a citizen. Jews were considered considered citizens in the Roman Empire, actually, but You could be, my mind is just jumping around here. In traditional Jewish society, people were not, was a traditional society, medieval society, early modern society even, Jews belonged to separate communities, which were separate from the rest of society. That's their legal position, was belonging to a separate sort of corporation that was a Jewish community. And you paid your taxes to that community, and everything you did was part of that community. And that changes when Jews, so it was a case of being classified as a group. Jews were in a category that were, I guess I just thought of it now, but I taught at Temple University, which was a non-preferred university in Pennsylvania. And I guess Jews were non-preferred, even when they were citizens. But the Jews really don't get actively involved in politics. So modern world, but in the pre-modern world, they were totally separate from the outside world. They belonged to a separate corporation politically. Now, they had contacts with the outside world. Of course, Jews always had contacts with the outside world, economic contacts. Otherwise, they couldn't survive. And they also had to get permission to live where they lived. Otherwise, they couldn't live there. Yes.
Were Jews considered citizens of the countries in which they lived?
Not until the modern era.
Oh.
In the medieval era, they were not citizens. They were sort of subjects of whoever the ruler was. And the ruler often decided the religion, sometimes decided the religion of his official religion of the area he ruled. But Jews were always outsiders, and they belonged to a separate corporation. And when they belonged to a separate corporation, they were self-governing. I mean, they lived according to Jewish law, and that was enforced by the Jewish community. And eventually, they might be freer as Jews not to follow Jewish law so strictly, but even then, they're still categorized in the same group with the people who do follow Jewish law. They're all part of the same entity. But pre-modern, virtually every Jew is, I think we would consider, pre-modern, I would consider virtually every Jew traditional. I.e., they were nominally Orthodox, because there was no other kind of Jew before the Reform movement developed in the 19th century. All Jews were part of the Jewish community, and the Jewish community was outside the larger community, and that defined who you were, what community you belonged to, and what your status was in society. That's until the 19th century in most cases, when Jews start to get citizenship rights, and then obsolete. In the 19th century, Germany wasn't Germany, it wasn't one country, it was, first by the 19th century, it was in the 60s, at least. And by the end of the century, well, Germany becomes Germany in 1871. But I'll use the term Germany and Austria sort of anachronistically to say that the Jews who lived in those areas that become Germany and become Austria, they would become citizens in the 19th century, but not before. It's a long struggle for citizenship in virtually every European country. In the United States, it was never really a problem. Well, yeah, okay. In the United States, they were accepted as citizens almost immediately, but they were rules that kept them out of full citizenship rights for a while. But so leave the United States out of this for a moment. We'll stick to Europe. In Europe, you had to, in the traditional world, you belonged to a separate community and followed separate laws. Your life was governed by Jewish law. From the time you were born to the time you died. And that's still the case in the Orthodox community today. Okay? But not Orthodox community. things, and besides, rarely you have independent, totally without periods that are separate from everything else. But in pre-modern, Jews lived in a Jewish community, often on a Jewish street, or eventually, sometimes in a ghetto, but the ghettos were a specific phenomenon in Italy and spread elsewhere in Europe into the 19th century, 20th century. But Jews were finally given rights as individuals when they get citizenship. And in France, where Jews was first place to emancipate the Jews, the French Revolution. No story there, but I want to talk to you. The Jews were accepted to be French citizens, basically under the condition that they gave up their autonomy. To each court, the French Revolution decided that an example of the French Revolution was for the rights of man and for everybody to be a citizen, everybody to be French, okay? But that didn't include Jews for a couple of years at least, because Jews had to fight separately, considered French citizens. And even then it was a struggle. And but before that, they were part of a separate society, and after that, after the 19th century, they become eligible to be French citizens, it's considered French. And by the middle of the 19th century, in Germany, most states of Germany used citizenship rights, 1967, and they were supposedly German like everybody else, but they were Jews by religion only. And that's the Jews in emancipated societies in the 19th and 20th century saw themselves as Germans of the Jewish faith, or the Jewish confession, Israelites, or whatever, Israelite confessions. But they were citizens of whatever country they were living in, if they were living in Western Europe, or in the States, or in Britain. In Britain, it's sort of a situation where they were not complete British citizens. Well, they were, but they weren't. They get political rights only in 1858, when the first Jew is elected to the British Parliament. One of the Rothschilds, of course. Another thing. Anyhow, that's what Jews, the first time you got a Jew elected to a political office was 1858. But often to accept a political office in this country or in Europe, you had to take an oath as opposed to oath on the New Testament. So you often were excluded for technical reasons, but in the pre-modern world, you lived according to Jewish law in Jewish communities, and you were governed. You were part of this. You belonged to the society in which you lived in only externally. And Jews were represented to the outside world at that time by often a wealthy Jew. Wealthy Jews always had the power in the Jewish community. It's a degree, but it's more democratic now than ever was. But democracy was not characteristic of any Jewish community, modern world or even in the modern world. First of all, only men had rights, and not women until the 20th century. And they only had, and the wealthy was often weighted voting in a Jewish community. So the wealthiest had more power than the poorer strata. And anybody who received money from the Jewish community generally didn't have voting rights within the Jewish community. So it's not a democratic society. It doesn't have equal rights for everybody, and really doesn't pretend to be democratic. Because at least pre-modern, who gets to lead the Jewish community locally?
Rabbi,
What? No. Sorry. No, by the early modern era, and probably even before that, a rabbi is an employee of the Jewish community. And still officially that. The rabbi is in charge of religious activities, and if you have any religious decisions, to make, you go to the rabbi. But, and usually every community had one if they could afford one, but anyway, that's, no, they could always afford one because there were always some people around who were rabbis or friends of rabbis, and their role in the community was to be the religious functionary of the community, and not to be the person to represent Jews to the outside world. In many cases, rabbis in the 19th century, rabbis often didn't speak the language of the land. So they could communicate with the outside world, and they were not considered the leaders within the Jewish community either, because leadership was held by
I'm rich.
the rich. You got it. Mhm. Yeah, and you see, in some communities, that it wasn't so great to be be president of the Jewish community. It's not an honor, because if the Jewish community couldn't meet its debts, guess who got to pay for it? So I mean, it's a mixed blessing there, but that's the way it was, and they had to have the wealthy as their leaders to some degree, because their status in the world was to pay taxes to the outside world. Taxes were often collected by the Jewish community and given to the outside world, but you needed other people to represent you in the outside world, often the wealthy, up until the 18th century, and to some degree thereafter. And the Jewish and relationship with the outside world was sort of limited, even though you might be living, Jews almost tended to live in their own neighborhoods. But they used to be required to live in certain neighborhoods if they were ghettoized, or they were often was, you should be still in Central York to stay, you go to small town, you used to be streets called Judengasse. Jews lived. Now, a Jewish district in New York in those days was predominantly Jewish, but not entirely Jewish. Still true today, that a Jewish neighborhood is not entirely Jewish. Well, it's, I don't know, it seems Jewish if they're about 30% of the population, maybe 4. But Jews tend to live among other Jews even today, but it used to be a requirement that they do so. And Jews were excluded from Christian housing often, and that goes into the 20th century America. But when there were covenants that were signed by homeowners, Jews there. But Jews generally were fairly segregated from the rest of the world, and they segregated themselves, even if they weren't totally separate. So they were represented to the outside world, not necessarily by the president of the Jewish community, but by someone who knew about the outside world, or went to any Jews who did. There was a person called the Stadlan, like that. Are you familiar with that term? A Stadlan is a representative of the Jewish community to the outside world, who's selected for this purpose. Actually, this one has music. I can't I can't spell it. Shtadlan, S-H-T-A-D, probably L-A-N. And also, when you're using Hebrew terms that are transliterated, sometimes they could be spelled in 5 different ways, okay? Or they spell the same in Hebrew, but if they have a Hebrew for it or Yiddish for it. But anyhow, Shtadlan was the representative of the Jewish community who could communicate with the outside world. And so when there was any conflict in the Jewish community, often there were certain individuals who could represent the Jewish community outside world. In the 18th century, those probably would have been court Jews. They were the first generation to really be part of society around them, sort of, and they would represent the Jewish community to the outside world. Because most Jews just were, they couldn't communicate. The only way Jews in a traditional world tended to communicate with the outside world was for economic reasons. Money, yes, they had to be able to communicate enough to do business with the outside world. So there were certain things that they could express, they could say, and they could communicate. Now, Jews as money lenders is a very medieval thing, and by the modern ages, fewer Jews are money lenders, although some Jews are bankers. But you have to be able to communicate with the outside world, to be part of the outside world to some degree before you can really represent the Jewish community. So we don't have Shtadlan, we don't officially have Shtadlanim anymore. But there are certain people who, by their elected position or by their wealth or by their status in society, seem to be the leaders of the Jewish community just because of who they are and how much money they have. I can think of, I don't know, Ronald Lauder, for example, I guess he's affiliated with the World Jewish Congress.
President.
President of World Jewish, that's right. So he represents the World Jewish Congress, but before he got that position, he was still powerful in the Jewish community because he was wealthy. So back around the circle again, Jews were represented to the outside world by people who could speak the language of the outside world and could communicate and could represent Jewish interests and also negotiate for the Jews. They had to do that. Now, I should probably end here, but I'll just take a couple more minutes. That in certain parts of the world, Jews were represented to the outside world by let me get my thoughts clear here. I lost it. Okay, age related, I think. But
They're talking about the leaders of the Jewish community.
yeah, the leaders of the community was, well, but sometimes they're official and sometimes they're unofficial. I mean, sometimes they're aren't always elected to the office, but they assume that position because they know how to deal with the outside world. And that was crucial because the only real connection that Jews have with the outside world before the modern era generally was because they paid taxes to the state. And if the state didn't benefit from having them there, they generally couldn't live there. Jews have to live there in the modern era. They have to live there by permission of the local ruler, who could decide how many Jews could live there and under what circumstances. And it depends on what part of Europe we're talking about, but in every case, Jews needed permission to live wherever they lived. And they had to pay for that often. And the ones who paid the most tended to be leaders of the community, but they had to pay for that right, and it also had to be renewed. And when a ruler decided that, up until the 18th century, ruler decided that the Jews were no longer a profitable group to have there, often got evicted, all of them. That was very common in, well, beginning in, I guess, 1290 in England, Jews to be expelled from towns or areas or countries or wherever they were. When the ruler no longer needed them, often because they could no longer afford to pay a lot of money to the king, then they got expelled. And so Jews, in lots of places in Europe, in the early modern era, they didn't have any Jews because they weren't allowed to live there.
It wasn't so much it wasn't profitable, but the king needed so much money that rather than taking 10% or 30%, the king decided I need 100%.
Well, yeah, but
So they would just
Yeah.
throw them out and confiscate all their property.
yes, that's one way of getting their money. And that's also was true in Spain, when you consider Spain, they would consider Spain partly because of the Jews, but partly because of the Muslims. And if they were still Jews, they lose all of their money. And or if the Inquisition got them, took their money and their property. And they didn't get it back even if they somehow were not convicted. But yeah, it's true that, but we're back to the same thing again, that it's Jews are allowed to live certain places, do certain things because they can afford to do it. And that changes in the modern era, but it's the whole system basically switches so that Jews become citizens, they can participate in the world around them, and they could be more or less involved in the Jewish community, although they always have to pay taxes in the Jewish community. But that is a whole change in the modern world. And we're still living in a modern world that keeps on changing, but the status of the Jews has now become one of individuals, not so much the whole community. Even though the community reacts to things as a community, it's not really a legal entity as it had been in the world. It's no longer considered a state within a state. It used to be a state within a state. And that's what they were always accused of, being a state within a state, even though they were no longer a state within a state. Any questions? I think I've confused enough. But now, any questions, or would I should clarify? I've mystified everybody. I should get my outlines more accurately focused. Because I can't go by this anymore. So next week, we will be talking about the modern era, the early modern era in Germany, Austria, and Russia, Europe, and liberalism, because that's how Jews first get into politics, through liberalism. And politics is, and that's also, the Jewish community becomes ideologues. Internally, they adapt, and externally, the status changes. But I'll leave it at that. Any questions?
What dates will you be addressing next week? The beginning and end of?
That depends on the country. You see,
What centuries?
Jews, what centuries? Okay. Jews, 19th century is generally when most Jews become citizens of the countries they live in. Or very end of the 18th century, France. 18th century is Germany, England, wherever else. But although in some places Jews had more freedom before than they did in other places. But Russia tends to be the last. Eastern Europe tends to lag, and so Jews are traditional there for longer, and they don't become involved in Russian politics until the 20th century. And then they get involved in different ways. But any other questions? So next time we'll get to the end of the 18th, we'll start with the end of the 18th century and go from there. And if I'm not saying things clearly, or I'm just not making sense, do ask. Because sometimes I never used to do this, but I do it now. I lose my train of thought and get involved in something that is not exactly appropriate for that time.
Don't we all?
Well, anyway, I rambled, but anyway, if you have any questions or there's certain things you want to make sure that you learn about regarding whatever the topic is for the day, I'll try to get there. Thank you.
Thank you.